Okay, perfect. So now we're ready to go.
Ready to go, yes. Direct or indirect? That's where we are tonight, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Oops, sorry. Let me switch to my other camera here. Just so a little better. Yeah, exactly. So we wanted to talk about, I guess, how to correct crookedness, right? Whether you do it directly or indirectly. And of course, in traditional dressage lessons, you're usually taught to do things very directly. Like in a straight line, very linear, you fix whatever's wrong, and Feldenkrais has different strategies, right?
It does. And I mean, actually, of course, the exercise world for humans is very similar to the dressage world. So as we've talked about before, if a muscle is overly tight, you stretch it. And if it appears weak, you strengthen it. And it's a sort of very much a problem solution type of approach. Right. But the problem is that we're somewhat more complex than just our muscles. And so often if you go headlong into stretching a tight and contracted muscle, you end up eliciting the stretch reflex. So it feels good in the moment and you feel like you've gained some length in that tight muscle, but then often it kind of almost snaps back like an elastic band. So the stretch reflex is a protective mechanism from the nervous system to make sure you don't tear the muscle. So with the Feldenkrais method, we have a more indirect approach, which is crazy for dressage people in that we go with the pattern. And when someone comes to me and say, for instance, they're short on the right side, I will shorten the short side. And I will shorten the short side and continue to shorten the short side until there's a sort of certain point where it's almost like the nervous system takes a deep breath and the side lengthens. And so this is the question is, does this work for horses? This is just one strategy. Does this work for horses? Well, I think through our work together, we've found that it kind of, if you do that, it sneaks in under the radar. And it's not that you stay there forever and ever and ever and you never go to the other way, but there's almost a sense of the horse sort of trusts you because you're not trying to go against their imbalance. And then in that moment of trust, and maybe they take a deep breath, you can start to find the other direction or a more optimal choice or possibility. So that's the first sneaky strategy is go with the pattern, whatever that may be. And
to be fair, in dressage, there are trainers who say that you should begin by working on the hollow contracted side, and
right. Yes.
A little bit that same idea.
Yes.
I think that
you work with the side that's easier.
Enough. If you bend the horse enough and make these muscles contract more, eventually they'll be happy to stretch and bend the other way.
Yeah, and that's pretty much it. And I guess they found that through trial and error. You
probably most likely.
Yeah. Got a bit cork in there, Thomas.
Why? Fly is committing suicide in my way.
Yeah, exactly. So it is something, and of course, the great thing about horses is they don't lie. So they really, you really feel whether that strategy works. And I watched something recently, which was a well-known trainer, and she was working a horse that was hollow right, but only by bending it to the left. And I thought that's kind of crazy. It was just 45 minutes of going against the pattern.
That's also very common.
Yeah.
And then in the Western world, sometimes people would tie horses up overnight in their stall with the nose by the rib cage, and so they had to towards the stiffer side, hoping that at some point they would, give in. So crazy.
Wow. Huh? Yeah, gosh, that is that's more than crazy. That's cruel.
Yeah, it is. But but shows you that people don't understand how the body works really. That come up with things like that. Another correction that you've talked about, which seems highly illegal to a normal dressage rider, is that if the horse is unbalanced, like and putting too much weight on the right shoulder, you almost increase that. You put even more weight on that shoulder. And I mean, I personally would think, oh my God, he's going to fall down.
He's going to break.
That's wrong. That is not. That is illegal. You don't do that ever. But apparently that works, right?
Yeah, it's a really interesting thing. With people, it works really well. There's a sort of point where you go, okay, you like to stand on your left leg, let's take you over that left leg, let's take you some more, let's take you some more, to the point where actually, because your nervous system prioritizes you staying upright, it's almost like it takes over and pulls you back to the middle. And I have experimented with this a little bit with my horse, and it's true. Oh God, it took a little leap of faith though, because as you say, I was like, oh, I don't want to damage him. He's going to break him. Oh, poor cuckoo. But he was just like, oh, yeah, this is what I like to do. And then he was like, oh, this is really horrible. And he just righted himself. He literally righted himself. It was so funny. Yeah, it was so funny. And I think in some ways, actually, it was an interesting moment because it took this courage from me to do something which I felt like might damage him. And yet he did rebalance. And I think he's been straighter ever since. Weird.
Interesting. That's very interesting. I mean, I've experienced it a little bit on the ground sometimes, like when you're working with a horse on the ground and they really lean on one shoulder, and you would like to get the weight off of that front leg, and you push on the shoulder so that he shifts the weight. Some horses push against you.
Yes.
And the more you try to push him off of that overloaded front leg, the harder they lean into you and push back. So sometimes if you push him more onto that shoulder where he's already supporting himself, then it's almost like it destabilizes the horse for a moment, and it creates an opening for pushing him in the opposite direction. It's like a rocking motion, right? You rock him more over that side where he's already carrying too much weight, and then there is this pendulum swinging back kind of effect, and you can take advantage of that. In motion, I still goes against everything I've been taught. It's really hard to overcome that and really try that. Because also in the back of my mind, I would be worried that the horse might trip and fall. If he leans very much on one shoulder and you lean even more, I would be a little worried that he could really fall down.
Yeah, I guess when I did that, I did it in a walk, and then there's a kind of a point, isn't it? He kind of sort of staggered around for a bit before he righted himself. Yeah, maybe there's I think like in any of these sort of experiments, which feel they're a little bit on the edge of what's comfortable in terms of what or your world perspective, you've got to do it within a level that feels like you can manage it.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, who knows what the truth is, what the actual truth is. Maybe you could do it in a gallop, I don't know, but I wouldn't be risking that.
At the trot and canter, there's more force, physical force, because of the body mass and the speed and so on. So I think that's a little riskier. At the walk, it's probably pretty safe. They're much less likely to fall down at the walk.
Yes.
And so that would be a good place to experiment.
Indeed. Which takes us into another principle, actually, which is, with Feldenkrais, you slow down. You reduce the range, you slow the speed down, you move at a speed in which you can pay very detailed attention to how you're doing the movement. So that's not how, you wouldn't move that slowly in life, like super slow, walking down the street. But it can be very interesting to study movement and the details of movement. And, the pattern tends to emerge through the slow movement, reducing the range, focusing on quality, smoothness, those types of things. And I think that does apply, really, doesn't it? That a lot of people, it's something we've touched on in the courses, is if something's not working in the trot, a pattern, then slow down, move down a gate, find the gate where you can work with improving the quality of the arena pattern you're trying out.
right?
Yeah. Mm.
Yeah, I mean, that's slowing down and downshifting one gear, until you feel like you're back on solid ground. That really works well. I've done that, for a long time. And Francois Boucher, I think in the second manner, he talked about that too. If you lose, or if the horse loses his lightness, then you stop and you recreate lightness. And for me, lightness always just means balance, self-carriage. Because the horse leans on the reins when he's out of balance. As soon as he's balanced, he doesn't need to lean anymore, right?
Yes.
So, that's why it's often very difficult to regain balance in a higher gait, or you can do it to a point. Horses lose balance frequently, right? And then if you're quick enough, you can catch it, you can rebalance within a few strides. But sometimes you pass this point of no return, and then it's too late. It's like, I guess in skiing, then you go down.
Absolutely.
You just fall.
Yeah. No, for sure.
The equivalent of horse, And I mean, the horse won't fall down necessarily, but then it drops the back, and he inverts, and he really just charges and pulls you. And there's nothing he can do. Like, he's the victim of gravity as much as the rider. And then there's just no recovering until you're back in the walk or the halt or so. So that works really well. Slowing down. Also, horses need time to think about their feet, especially when you're changing the balance and you want the horse to move in new and different ways that he's not used to, or if you want the horse to support his weight differently in ways that he's not used to. I think then they need to go really slowly and really think about every single foot. Okay, which leg is next? Where does it go? And if I pick this one up, how do I support myself so I don't fall down? And sometimes you can really almost feel the horse thinking these things, because they move very slowly and they need their time. And if you try to push them faster, then they brace and resist, and then they refuse. Because then they don't know what to do. And then they think, I'm going to fall down, I'm going to die.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because, in a way, when you slow down, there's a pace you can go, which actually makes it quite almost difficult to move because it's so slow. Because in a sense, momentum, of course, and using your mass, your body mass to move you through space is enormously helpful. If you really slow that down, you can't really take advantage of that in quite the same way as when you're moving fast. But I find what happens is if you slow things down super, super slow, like you're moving through treacle, when you speed up, the quality has just changed so exponentially. It's extraordinary. So it's really, really worth that kind of like, how slow can I really go? How small can I really go? How minimal?
Exactly.
Can I almost just do it in my, in my imagination? It's that small. And actually, thinking about that, I think that's something, doing it in my imagination with my horse. I've played around with that hacking, but not so much in the school, because I'm always worried in the school we might just kind of grind to a halt and never move again. Whereas with hacking, there's a kind of momentum of, he likes to move forward, he's enjoying himself. But I don't know what it would be like. Your skills there are so much more advanced than mine that you might be able to, do some really interesting things with that.
It depends. I mean, one interesting thought is this, doing things in tiny increments, like with lateral, for example. We always talk about the homeopathic dosages. That's something that resonates with Feldenkrais in a way, I guess, that you can even just think about shoulder in or haunches in, and then you can try to move the hips or the shoulder a millimeter and another millimeter and another millimeter until eventually you arrive at the full movement. And then in terms of the speed, there is in dressage, there is this conflict in a way of opinions between the French school and the German school, right? The Bolshevists, they always say you have to create balance first before you can move. That's why they do a lot at the halt, and they like to get the horse all balanced and light at the halt, and then they move off. And the Germans are the other way. They feel like movement stabilizes, right forward. And there is something to that to a degree. It's not absolute, right? It's like when you ride a bike, it's easier to ride a little bit faster. If you don't put your feet on the ground and you try to halt with your bike, it's very hard not to fall over, right? So, and I think that's sort of the idea behind the German method, that it's easier if you go forward, if you establish a rhythm, if you establish a little pushing power, and so on. And for some horses that works, right? But of course, there are also horses who will just brace and lean. It's like they careen around the ring. They're out of balance and they will never find their balance as long as you're riding forward, So
yeah, I think it's interesting, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I mean, if you were going to be really honest, Thomas, where would you lean to? More towards the French, more towards the German?
It's a good question. It depends a little bit on the horse, but probably more towards the go slow and halt when you feel like the horse is losing balance. So it's like it becomes a stop and go, you know. There's a danger in halting for too long too, because the horses can start dreaming and then they get behind the aids and then they can grow roots. And so there's got to be a little bit of movement of the legs, but there can also be a step to the left and a step to the right and a step forward. So it's good to move the legs often enough so the horse doesn't really grow roots and then he's stuck, is what you're afraid of with QQ, that you'll never move again, right?
Exactly.
But some horses are like that, so you kind of have to create a little bit of movement, but it doesn't have to be the full throttle working trot around the arena, so it's a balancing act. It's like not all or nothing. It's not completely either or. You have to find the right amount for each horse, the right amount of power, the right amount of movement, and all these things. But these stop and go exercises are often very good, that you ask the horse to halt, and then you ask him to take a step or two in one direction, left, right, forward, backward, doesn't matter. And then stop again, and then do another couple of steps and halt again. That often works really well. And you can combine that with rocking the weight, take a couple of steps to the left, take a couple of steps to the right, so the weight has to shift. And that often helps the horse really to feel where his feet are. And that can help the horse really find his balance.
Yeah, it's very interesting. Kind of thinking a little bit about, my horse, who was presumably worked forward. And he pushes like a champion. However, when I did, come to slowing down, it clearly confused him. It was almost like he would freeze and panic. And I think that's what the planting was about, actually, was that he didn't know what to do. If he wasn't going forward and pushing and working, he didn't understand. Nobody had ever taught him how to do anything else. So I guess there's a sort of, if I'd understood more in the early days, I would have understood that actually, he needed a lot of time to process and to
probably.
Whereas if you were, backing a horse yourself, then of course you would do it according to, your principles and methods, and it would be a very different thing.
Yeah, it's easier then if you can start them correctly. With Cuckoo is probably one of those examples who does not work well with the German model of forward.
No, he doesn't.
Faster.
No, he doesn't. No.
So he would just probably brace and get stiff and tight and rigid and maybe refuse to go at all at some point. But what often works well is if you do the stop and go, even if it's just always forward, couple of steps forward and halt, couple of steps forward. So you create motion and you stop, and you create motion and you stop. And then the horses find their balance, and then they become round. And then you, at some point when you feel like, okay, he's taking a couple of steps and he stays up in his back and round in the neck and light in my hand, and if I feel like I have him on my seat, then you could ask him to take a couple of steps forward. And if he stays like that, you let him proceed, you just keep going. And then you take that balance that you created at the halt with you, and I used to do stuff like that in clinic lessons a lot too, where I told the students, we want the horse in front of the leg, on the seat, uphill, round, and light, So 5 things, right? And then when you
not too difficult.
Exactly. What you discover then when you do that is it's pretty easy to get 2 of the 5 or 3, but it's very difficult to get all 5, because the horse might be in front of the leg, in the sense he goes, when you touch him with the leg, he goes forward, but maybe then he drops his back and you can't stop him and he's not round, right? Or maybe he's in front of the leg. Maybe you can even control the tempo with the seat, But yeah, he could be up but not round, or he could be round but not up and bite his chest, that sort of thing. Getting all of those at the same time is a challenge, right? But if you just keep doing the stop and go, stop and go, stop and go, eventually the horse will get it.
Yeah.
And then you can say, okay, now that I have that, now we stay in that walk. And then you go up to the next gate. So now that I have it at the walk, now I want to do a transition to the trot, and I want to maintain in front of the leg on the seat, uphill, round, and light in the trot. Right? And then you try that, and initially maybe
it all falls apart, no doubt.
Exactly, it falls apart. So you go back to the walk.
Yeah.
And you try to recreate these 5 conditions. And so maybe you need to halt again because you can't even get it back at the walk. That's a common thing, right? So you stop and go, stop and go. Then you stay at the walk. Then you go up to the trot. And then eventually you'll be able to maintain this in the trot. This is a sort of a very logical, even if a little tedious kind of way of proceeding.
Well, nothing is tedious if you're, if you're comfortable with being in the present and paying attention.
Yeah, exactly. And it just takes a while.
Deeply interesting. It's not a speedy process.
Exactly.
Actually, what you were talking about there reminds me a little bit of one of the other principles of Feldenkrais, is that every movement of quality is reversible. So in that moment, if I'm reaching for something, I mean, it's a sort of basic thing that we do all day long. Can I reach with quality and reverse the reach with the same quality? Can I reach in a pathway and travel back along exactly the same pathway? And I think when a horse is truly balanced, that's exactly what you feel. You take 2 steps to the right and you can come back to the left pretty much in reverse. You take 2 steps forward, you take 2 steps back, you round, and the reverse of that is arching. So it's like this continuous play between all the, you've got these polarities of movement in a sense. And you don't just want to go from polarity to polarity. You want to understand how you get to each. And I think the trouble with riding, from how I see it from my perspective of years of studying human movement, is that people got into this thing of like, oh, I want to just be stuck at this polarity, which is holding a frame, a particular frame, which everybody says looks good. And then all I need to do is stay there.
Exactly.
But that isn't movement. That's just stuckness.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, it becomes static. Yeah, that's interesting, isn't it? Yeah, and when you can reverse these movements, like go 2 steps to the left, 2 steps to the right, and so on, then it feels like you're sitting on a ball, and you feel like you can roll your ball left, right, forward, backward, and the horse stays round and there's no resistance. And so that then, you've come a pretty long way in the training of the horse if you can do that, right? They're fairly advanced. When you can't do that, then you feel more like you're sitting on one of those shipping containers, right? They're all angular, straight.
I do know that, yes.
Yeah, and they're hard to move, right?
Yes,
there's
super
a lot of
hard.
if you try to push a shipping container, if it doesn't have wheels, and if you sit on a ball of the same mass and same volume, that's easy to move, right? So that's how I think a little bit of the horse. As the untrained horse or the rehab horse is very much like a big shipping container. It's hard and rigid and angular, and it's very hard to move. There's lots of resistance, and then as you train the horse, they become rounder, more like a big ball, and they become softer, and then they become easy to move in any direction, anytime. Yeah. So that's in a way that's the goal of dressage, right? Because dressage horses used to be fighting horses, right? Whether it was in the military or in bullfights or so, but they had to have this ability to move quickly, left, right, forward, back, accelerate quickly, stop quickly, turn around, go the other way, because it was a matter of life and death back then.
It's actually something that occurred to me when you were talking about that, was that if you get the sense that you're losing what you're describing, you also need to have the courage to stop and reset and rebalance yourself and rebalance your horse, because otherwise you're just there's a beautiful quote which I used for one of the blogs, and then someone reposted that, which is about, if you do one movement badly, and then you do the next 20 badly. But if you do one movement well, you know, then you can do the next 20 well. So it's all about, well, there's no point in even making the first movement if it's just, you know, if you're continually confirming a poor quality way of moving. And sometimes that means taking the time, doesn't it, to really just kind of pull back. And that's not always so easy. And I think also with riding, you know, and this is my experiences coming back as a novice, is the pressure from the outside, you know, from outside trainers, from people observing, is like, you know, why are you stopping? Or you got to keep going, or push him into the corner, or, you know, it's just push, 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 push.
Yeah, very true. There is a lot of judgment and from the outside.
Yeah, and a kind of a lack of understanding of, you know, this organic process of learning is so much about patience, about the ability to be in the present, about, you know, how is my horse today? Not the horse I imagine I want, not the horse I had yesterday, but how is my horse today, right now? And how am I today, right now? And how do we meet?
Exactly. And you know, when you lose balance, or the horse loses balance, right, you feel like I have to go back to the walk or the halt. And for me, it's always, I have to fix myself, I have to fix my seat first, then I have to fix the horse, in quote unquote, right, help him get back into balance, and then we can continue with the ride. It's always like, fix my seat first, then help the horse rebalance, and then we can go on. You know, that's always that constant cycle in a way that you go through. And every time you lose balance and you feel like I can't fix it within the gate, within a couple of strides, you know, then I'm past that point of no return. So we have to go back to walk or halt, and then I have to adjust my seat. I have to, you know, then with a better seat, address the horse and improve the horse's balance, and then we can do the next thing, you know, that we want to do.
Because unless it's a matter of your survival, then it isn't really worth going so far that you have to make some dramatic recovery in order to pull everything back. And I think there's also a sense for me that it's not really fair on your horse to do that as well, because, you know, they have less choice.
I mean, luckily, you know, usually we're not being chased by an angry bull, so we can take our time, right? We don't have to get it done now, or we did, but we can say, stop, you know, let's think about this, or, you know, we can take all the time in the world, which is nice. It's a luxury that the old masters didn't always have, right? And you can see it in the very practical applications in, you know, whether it's you know, reining or working equitation or doma vaquera, where, you know, they have to get a job done and they have to herd cattle or whatever. They're not so much concerned with some of the academic details as we are, because they need to get the job done, right? Or they need to get out of the way of the bull if they want to live and ride another day, right? So priorities shift under those circumstances. But
it is kind of like, isn't it, that then you're, you know, there's that in some ways we're talking about artistry and they're talking about work, but then of course sometimes they meet, and that's kind of
exactly. And of course, you know, so the better trained your horse is, the easier it is to do the job, you know. So that's why all these people who do the practical application, they train their horses in the arena in between their competition, or to refresh the horse for the actual work. Like in the military, it was customary over the winter to train the horses and to fix all the bad habits that they acquired during spring, summer, and fall, you know, when they went off to maneuvers or wars, because, you know, you can't ride pretty, and you know, riding academically correctly is not your highest priority when you're in a war, you know, in a battle, or even in a maneuver. So they had to do a lot of repair work over the winter, you know. So and I imagine that the other disciplines will probably do that too, that in the down season, or when they're not bullfighting or they're not herding cattle, that they probably do some training with the horses to tune them up again, so they can do their job better afterwards.
In England, of course, we have a lot of hunting, And the hunters have 3 or 4 months off at the end of the hunting season, and then they get slowly brought back into work because they're super fit, those horses. But there's very much, in some ways, hunting is presumably at some point was a kind of a working activity.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, it's unpredictable, if you have to if you're trying to hunt a deer or something, then or elk or whatever, then you never know where they're going to go, but you have to.
I'm looking forward to hunting an elk in England.
Yeah, maybe
elk that's got lost.
Yeah, exactly. But bigger and something bigger than a fox, So
Indeed.
then, something that can jump over hedges and ditches and so on, and then the horses have to be fit. They may have to run for a long time, right?
Yeah.
And, you're faced with all kinds of unpredictable situations.
Indeed.
So it's the better trained the horse is, the better your chances of survival.
It's interesting, isn't it?
Yeah.
Should we look at a few questions, do you think?
Yeah, I was thinking we should definitely see here. Ricky said, I did experiment with a Feldenride in standing still to see how much I could bend left and right, building the range. At first, my horse went along until one point, and she decided to stand square and grounded as a rock. And if I had wanted, I could have been going from 3 to 9 on the clock. Really amazing where and how she decided to take care of me and herself, not to lose balance together.
So it sounds like she went with you to a certain degree. And then what we're talking about is that, in the hierarchy of survival for mammals, it's super important that you keep your balance. So the fear of falling reflexes will kick in.
Yeah. Thing is too, if you flex at the halt, there comes a point sometimes where the horses get behind the aids and they grow roots and then they start bracing. So that's why I tend to flex a couple of times and then ask the horse to take a step forward, even just to check whether they're still on the leg and they're still thinking forward. Because once they've come off the aids and they're thinking backwards, then you have a problem. And it's more difficult to get the forward motion back, or get the horse to think forward is harder once they've essentially snuck out the back door, and then their feet are just bracing. So that's something to look out for. And you can feel it when they start to say goodbye to the aids and they start to get a little behind you, So
believe me, I'm very familiar with that.
It happens faster on some horses than others, right?
It's tough. That's tough.
It is. Christiane says, so for the recovery, may the halt be manageable because the learned history before instead of the German tradition forward. Yeah, definitely. I mean, it always depends a little bit on the horse's mindset or mentality and confirmation and history and so on. But if you're rehabbing a horse, it's healthier if you can go slow, right? Because if you ride forward at the trot and the canter and they're not quite balanced, then there's a lot of wear and tear on the tendons, on the joints. That's another aspect to keep in mind. So it's better if you can go slow, and really that's what I would do with a rehab horse. Start with lunging and work in hand, and then when I'm able to ride again, start at the walk and really balance and supple the horse at the walk, and then trot a little bit and go back to the walk and fix the balance at the walk, and then trot again a little bit and so on. So you can gradually build the strength and the stamina, but always prioritize balance. As soon as you lose balance, back to the walk. Because it keeps the horse sound, keeps the horse healthy.
I mean, funnily enough, I do exactly the same skiing. If I'm feeling I'm starting to lose that capacity to be able to turn exactly where I want without effort, or I will come to a halt and I'll do some kind of oscillations or something which kind of restores my sense of a center from which I can move equally easily. In any direction, which is another of these Feldenkrais principles.
Yeah, exactly.
Or it's not even a Feldenkrais principle, it's a principle of good movement. It's not like Feldenkrais came up with that one, but he understood it very well.
Yeah, that's interesting. I see Ricky says, now I understand the difference where that forward comes from. Thanks for explaining it. Let me see. Ricky says, lovely addition to the details from yesterday. Now I get it why the transitions are so important.
Yeah, I never really realized, what they were about, but it really makes sense to me now.
Yeah. Lisa says, I have to ride my horse in a slow walk for nearly a year, and it has made him stronger in the hind end. If I ride him too much forward, he gets too much weight on his front hand. If I feel he loses his balance, I let him go a little more forward. And when he has his balance again, I slow down the walk. Yeah, makes sense. And Cindy says the ability of the horse to move, as Thomas is describing, is also dependent on the balance of the rider. Yeah,
indeed.
Always, yeah. Then the dresser says, listen to your commentary on the Nuno Oliveira video in the Eleus bundle. Oliveira was working the horse in a leg yield, almost haunches in very slow, deliberate steps. I've tried that with Simon, Halfling or Draft Course, and I'm having a really good success with the slow motion work, more attentive and connected, better tempo in both walk and trot. Slow is better with some horses. Yes, Catherine, patience. I'm finally learning real patience.
Yeah.
Yeah, when I first saw these videos of Nuno Oliveira, that was quite the contrast to the German FN kind of riding that, where I had started. But I found it very interesting and very appealing, and it was obviously working, so I experimented with that too. And then this super slow motion walk in lateral movements on a circle that can be super effective for some horses. Yeah, I mean, it's not all the time for all horses. It's usually for a period of time. With some horses, it's brilliant, and then at some point you have to move on from there. But it's like with everything, right? Every remedy, every therapy that you use, eventually it becomes unnecessary, right? It makes itself superfluous. And
I think what you've often done with me, Thomas, is we do an exercise, and then in walk, for instance, maybe it's a square serpentine or something, and then we test it out in the trot. Has the trot improved? So we're not getting stuck in just, which it's not good for Cuckoo to be stuck in one walk, because he'll just start snoozing. But that is very effective. You have almost like a reference movement or a test movement, and when you have a test movement, you can return to that test movement, and then anything you've done, any intervention, if you like, to use a therapeutic term, that you've done, you're testing whether that intervention was effective or not. So you can keep the test movement consistent throughout. Maybe that's a 20-meter circle in trot or whatever.
Exactly. Yeah, that's something that sort of evolved on its own in my clinic lessons, that I would do like complicated walk exercises that were more brain work for the horse, and awareness through movement essentially for the horse, right?
Yeah,
and
definitely.
then I felt like now we need to go forward in the trot and see if it did anything. Like, is the horse now better or worse? Because the whole purpose of the exercise is that the horse can now move better. And then we have to check that, and you can often see that better at the higher gait. You can see the result of the exercise better at the trot or the canter than at the walk. So I usually go up one gait and then just do a big circle or hold school. And then also you have this balance between intellectual work for the horse and then cardiovascular workout, because you still have to, exercise the muscles and the lungs and the heart and so on a little bit too. And so you go back and forth between those, and you can gradually escalate and do something complicated at the trot and then do something simple at the canter, and eventually you can do complicated things at the canter too, and it builds skills. So that I've had good success with that. So it started sort of intuitively, and then at some point I noticed that there's a pattern there that I'm following. So,
I haven't noticed it particularly with other trainers, so it's something which I really enjoy. That kind of encouragement to experiment with a particular, as you say, something which is more complex, more detailed, and then feel the freedom that comes from that. Actually, that's how I view it, is the concentration and the focus, and it's something that's very internal. Then you have the benefit of just feeling that sense of connection and being at one with your horse, which is lovely.
And the rider needs, also the horse needs the time to experience the new balance in his body, right? It's like the car mechanic who fixes the car and then takes it for a spin around the block to see if it runs better. And it's a little bit like that, right? And the horse needs to experience what that feels like, that new balance that we created with the walk exercise. And the rider needs to have time to observe how is the horse moving, and you need time to think about that. So what am I going to do now as a next step in the session? Do I do the exercise again? Do I do it in the opposite direction? Do I change subject? Do I work on something else? So I feel like this trotting around gives me time to reflect, feel and reflect at the same time. I think that's important to have these. It's like a break, but it's a working break. The horse is trotting or cantering, but you have time to really observe and think. So what makes sense to do next? Where do I go from here? I think that's an important thing too.
And we do that in skiing. As a warm-up, you might make a very particular type of tight turn with a lot of attention to carving through, steering and stuff, and then you let it go free. And then you feel the point where you kind of lose it, and then you bring it back to this tightness again. It's a similar kind of feeling. And then the other, in tennis, it can be really, really helpful. Say you're having a problem with one of your strokes, is you reverse it. So, forehand, you take your arm back and then you pull through, but can you reverse it so that you come from the end of the stroke to the beginning? And often in that reversing, that's where you find where the glitch is.
That's so interesting. That's interesting. So many similarities, huh?
I think so. Yeah.
So Ricky says, but in this working as a job, there is great trust and ability between rider and horse, sometimes a lot more than in dressage, I think. Yes, in good cases, yes, maybe not always, but in good riders, there will be trust and between horse and rider. Of course, if your life depends on the horse, then there better be mutual trust and a good relationship. Otherwise, you're screwed.
Sayonara.
Exactly. Maria says, to know the right moment to back off takes a lot of skill and mindfulness. Yes, absolutely.
And getting it wrong. Honestly, I think that's what it takes, is getting it wrong a lot.
That's true.
It's only through getting it wrong that you're going to kind of feel like, oh yeah, I did it too early, I did it too late, that was just right.
Yeah, exactly. Jackie says, I think one of my limiting factors in a schooling session is when I feel my brain capacity to analyze and plan has reached its limit, even though Angel and I would like to do more. Well, then it's time to stop. If you feel like my brain can't take any more, then either take a break and see if you can recover, or otherwise finish.
Or just go free.
I guess you could go for a hack afterwards.
Go for a canter.
But the horses have that too, that their brain can only handle a certain amount of input and information, and then they need a break or they need to finish the ride. Otherwise, it's just gets counterproductive then.
There's a couple of questions in the Q&A.
So I'm just checking YouTube.
Yes.
So there's one. Cheryl Arelis says, I so much appreciate the explanation about whether to halt or slow down versus going forward at all costs. I've chosen to slow down things and to slow things down and work on balance before pushing my older mare more forward. Especially with older horses, that's often better to go really slow because they can be a little creaky, they may be a little arthritic and so on. And making them trot and canter around like crazy, and when they're stiff and out of balance, that just breaks them down. That's not fair to the horse. And the older horses do really well with a slow, thoughtful warm up. Maybe warm them up in hand or long rein or something, or take 15 minutes to walk. And bend and turn and sidestep and ride. Figure eights and serpentines, and make every part of the body supple before you do your first trot. And I actually had a German teacher in the 80s who did that too. He was always complaining how the Germans always just post the trot and go forward. It's just like all they do. There was a very set pattern to the way most people would warm their horse up. And he said, well, if you ride the horse at the walk for 15 minutes, you can skip the whole rising trot, and you can go right to a collected trot, and the horse is there, right? But you have to, of course, supple the horse, balance the horse at the walk. And that impressed me back then. And I thought, yeah, that makes sense. It's logical. And yeah, you can protect the horse's joints and tendons by doing that.
I think Ingrid Klimke, she says she always walks for 15 minutes, always.
Yeah.
She's very structured. She's incredible. I mean, she's very, very structured, isn't she?
Yeah, I don't know how she trains, but I mean, videos I've seen of her, they're always good. She's really a good rider. But
yeah.
Oh yeah, here now see the Q&A. Sue Barton says, if you have a horse that falls onto the right shoulder when on circle right, and of course falls out and makes circle an irregular shape, would it be a good idea to allow the circle to get smaller on right rein until he wants to step out to a bigger circle, or allow the left circle to become bigger? Yeah, we had that conversation, right?
I think that's exactly where we started, isn't it?
One of the Q&As. So we were talking about, in dressage, of course, if horse falls in, you would enlarge right away. That's like the traditional way of fixing it. But then Catherine was saying, well, you could, or somebody else even, I think
Caroline Duff Riddle. Caroline Duff Riddle suggested this to me. On the side that the horse falls in, just let them go there. Do it more and more, or almost encourage them, and at a certain point they will rebalance.
Yeah, I mean, if the horse wants to make the circle smaller and you let him, then he'll find out at some point that smaller circles are harder work than bigger circles. And then, at some point the horse will want to go back out. And I mean, I use that idea sometimes if the horse makes a mistake or tries to evade. Sometimes, for example, horses will evade by going up to the next higher gate. Like you're trotting, the horse now breaks into the canter because he feels like, oh, the trot is too much work. And then if I canter a little bit behind the aids and a little crooked, then it's less work. And then sometimes I let the horse do it in the canter, and I tell him, if you think that's easier, if you want to do that, that's fine, but we do it right. I'm not going to change my pattern. I'm not going to make the turns bigger. We're going to stay exactly in that exercise. And then, the horse will either do it in the canter, which is great, or he'll say, never mind, too much work, I'll go back to the trot. And then that's okay too, right? So it's like a win-win. I don't tell the horse you made a mistake, and I don't correct him in that sense, but if he suggests something and he wants to do something, he has to do it correctly, so to speak. And it's like with that falling in, you could say, we'll make the circle smaller, but we'll try to do it right, and then the horse will realize bigger circles are less work. So I'd rather go out to the big circle,
I mean, I think one thing which has helped me in terms of humans is that, for instance, if someone arrives like this, it's just a movement pattern. It's just a possibility of movement that is within our capacity. And I guess that's the same for the horses. It's just a pattern. And the only difficulty is if they're stuck there and it's the only thing they ever do, because then you get this wear and tear on the joints. But doing it for just one small spiral in is not going to kill them.
That's true. And Sue Barton says, falls out on the circle left and makes the shape irregular. That's when they fall out, it might be slightly different, because then they could become unsteerable. If they fall out and you let them, then you can lose control over the horse. So in that case, I would maybe counterbend or ride a diamond instead of a circle, so you ride from circle point to circle point on straight lines and then ride a sharp turn. But also in these cases where you feel like I'm losing control over the outside shoulder, I might stop and then do a turn on the haunches 90 degrees and then maybe follow up with a bit of a full pass from that old outside leg. So if you're on a circle, stop, turn the shoulders in so the horse is facing the center of the circle, and then move away from the old outside leg. So your horse's spine is like the hand of a clock, and you're moving that hand of a clock around your circle line with the hind leg. The hind legs are on the first track and the front legs are closer to the center. And then you can either do a turn on the haunches in the other direction, return to the original direction, or you could go straight across the diameter and then decide either I turn left or right. Either you go in the same direction and test whether it's better now, or you go in the opposite direction, which is sometimes better. So you alternate back and forth. And then usually the horse then starts to pay attention to your outside aid. Sometimes it's just that they don't listen to your outside leg and rein, for example, when they're going in the hollow direction, and they just push through the outside shoulder, and they can, veer and overbend the neck, and then, you can't determine where to go anymore. So then in those cases, if you feel like you're losing control essentially over your vehicle, if you lose steering of your car, stop.
Yes, exactly. And I guess it's always within, whenever we suggest something which is an experiment, it always has to be within a contract, if you like, of safety, of what feels okay for you. I mean, I'm laughing a little bit inside because I can remember, in the first year I had Cuckoo, like he would cruise off down, falling out through his shoulder. And then he would stop in the corner and start eating the hedge. And I literally had no control at all. I just, and I was at a livery yard then. So people would be like, why is your horse eating the hedge? And I said, if I could stop him, I would. So that's the extreme example of letting your horse do exactly what you want. If I'd had some options, I definitely would have done what you said about keeping the spine like a fingers of a clock. But I was like, okay, I'm here. He's eating the hedge. I'm powerless. I have no control whatsoever.
Yeah, that can happen, and sometimes it happens very quickly within a couple of strides, right? That everything is going fine, cruising along, and suddenly you completely lose steering, and then you have to improvise at some point. Sometimes there's just no easy or elegant solution. Sometimes you do what you have to, right? Just to get him to pay attention to that outside leg and rein or whatever, and to turn in the other direction. But it's in those situations it's easier to do it at the halt than in motion, because then when they really drift through the shoulder, then the momentum takes over and it overpowers your outside leg and rein or the outside knee and rein, and then you have to take away that physical force of the speed, and the body mass, and then you have a chance again, to steer again. So, and then when that happens, I would observe or try to play the movie back in my mind, like, where did I lose control? Because you may have lost control while the horse was still cruising along and you didn't notice it for a few strides. Only when you came to a certain point in the arena and he tried to make a right turn or so, then it was obvious that, I have no control over this horse anymore. Then you have to learn to feel, when does that start and how can I prevent that?
Yeah, that's something we've talked about in Aware Rider, isn't it? When you track back. So often we start to apply corrections at the point of no return. But if you track back to where was that first place where you still had some possibility to shift, that can be a really interesting process of observation. And it can get more and more detailed because maybe it's even a little bit before where you first think it is.
Exactly. It's often starts very subtle.
Exactly. So that's a fun thing to do.
I went through a phase in my riding where that happened a lot, that horses would suddenly veer and turn 90 degrees, or it wouldn't stay on the circle, and things like that. And then I started to really observe, like, where he was on the aids, everything was going fine, and suddenly, makes this 90-degree turn really sharply, or just changes out of the circle, and I can't do anything to stop it. Sometimes I notice, well, he's kind of shifting my weight onto my outside seat bone, and then he takes that as a hint that we want to turn right now, but he set it up. So so when I could see these patterns and where it started, then I could guard against it and prevent it, and then the problem didn't happen anymore. So that was really interesting.
Mm. I know Anne-Marie asked this on Tuesday as well. So she asked, what is the ideal movement pattern for the pelvis in the sitting trot?
Up and down.
Up and down, forward and back.
Yeah, I don't think of it that way. I just try to feel, I try to balance myself.
Oh, yeah, I think
try
so.
to feel the horse's movement and try to accommodate that. And I try to feel for where is the horse hard, and could I soften that with my seat by sometimes resisting a little bit, or sometimes encouraging more movement, creating a space where the horse is not filling my seat enough, that sort of thing. So I don't think, okay, back paddle or figure eight, that's too abstract and not related to the horse's movement. I really just try to.
I think that's right. And it's going to depend on, how the horse moves, how you and what you're saying, it's always about, do you have all the possibilities of movement available in your pelvis, in which case they'll be available according to the demands of the situation, or what you want to bring to the situation, which is what you've just said. So, and if you can do a figure eight with your pelvis, you can do a pelvic clock with your pelvis, then you're going to have all those patterns which you need, but there isn't an ideal, because it's also, Anne-Marie, you're not going to move like Thomas does, and Thomas isn't going to move like you do. But I found if I try to impose a particular pattern in the sitting trot, it's not very good. But if I just kind of go, let my pelvis just be moved and not try to stop it, then that works quite well.
Yeah, what I tend to do is try to, feel the horse's back, but also feel for regularity or irregularity. So if there are rough edges and irregularities, I try to smooth them over with my seat. And then sometimes, like, I resist a little here, I make a little space there. It happens very quickly, and it's not really an intellectual decision or process. It's just based on what I feel at the moment, and I just try to smooth it over, smooth over the rough edges, make it all, every stride, like these pearls on a string, where each pearl is exactly same size, same shape, same color, everything is the same, right? And it's very much a feel-based thing for me. So,
which means you're probably going to be doing something different with the left side of your pelvis to the right. And that, I think that is, that's sport, that's movement.
And it's different for each horse, of course. They all move differently, right? So you have to figure out what's the horse's real natural walk, trot, or canter, and then try to bring that out. It's like, Michelangelo was saying, he sees the statue in the marble and he chips everything away that's not part of that statue. And it's a little bit like that with the gait. Like, try to eliminate everything that's not part of that horse's natural movement, all the hardness, all the roughness, all that sort of thing.
Yeah, you've got to keep playing with it. And you're doing all the right things, Anne-Marie. You do a lot of work on yourself, and so all those patterns will be available, and then they'll just emerge at the right time. That's a way of not really answering your question, isn't it? Which is perfect. And I know you've got to get to your next meeting, Thomas.
I know. Yes. I'll be a little bit late to do this in German now. So
all right, so we'll say goodnight, and
thank you. Thanks, Catherine.
Take care, everybody, and see you soon, hopefully in the Straightness course.
Yes, and I think on Saturday we have one more session, right?
Right.